I doubted we'd see anything today beyond scattered farmhouses and the occasional shop, but that was hardly reason to relax. The neighbors in this small community would be familiar with one another. Anyone who did see us would know we weren't from here, which was why I immediately raised my guard when I spotted a woman headed towards us with a basket in her arms. She waved, then realized we were strangers and lowered her hand. This was wartime, and she knew she must be cautious too. She came closer, and I saw her basket filled with eggs, perhaps on her way to market. I wanted those eggs, even a single one. It had been a long time since I'd had a fresh egg, and my mouth watered for it. Don't stare at the basket, I reminded myself. Don't give her a reason to be suspicious. She greeted me in Polish, and I responded in Polish, as polite and friendly as possible. "Where are you going?" she asked. "There's nothing around here." "Our grandmother lives up the road," I casually replied. "Our parents sent us out of the city to stay with her." "Who's your grandmother?" Her tone was marginally friendly, though her eye was almost constantly on Esther. That worried me. "Maria Nowak?" It was a good Polish name, matched my papers, and was common enough that it wouldn't surprise me if there actually was a woman nearby with that name. Lying had become second nature to me now. Half the time I had to stop myself from lying when it wasn't necessary, just because I could. The woman shrugged. "I don't know her, but we've had many new people come in from the city over the last couple of years." She looked at Esther again, too long, too earnestly. In response, Esther looked down at her feet, all but admitting guilt. "Where are you girls from?" "Lodz." Although I told Esther not to claim having come from anywhere she was unfamiliar with, in this case we had to. There was no other big city close enough to justify why we were here on foot. "I go into Lodz every week to sell eggs." She lifted her basket, igniting my hunger again. Maybe I've seen you there before because you look familiar." That was addressed to Esther. "Perhaps on Burbach Street?" Esther drew in a breath and looked down again. Burbach Street was one of the few roads in Lodz that we did know. It was inside the ghetto, the very road where we stood before Abraham brought us into his apartment. The road where Abraham and his friends were shot. I laughed that away, each chuckle choking on my feelings of guilt and shame. "Burbach Street?" The woman didn't laugh, and any friendliness in her smile vanished. She addressed me first. "I don't know about you, girl, whether you're one of those Jews or whether you're one of those fool Poles trying to hide them." Her eyes turned to Esther. "But you are definitely one of them. And if you've come from Lodz, then you escaped from Lodz." It was time to be aggressive. I pulled my Kancarte from my pocket and held it out for the woman. "See this? I'm Polish, same as you." By then, Esther had her identification papers out as well. "And same as my cousin. How dare you make such accusations?" "Identification papers can be forged. I've seen—" She paused to the sound of a wagon heading up the road. In it was a large man driving a pair of horses. His face seemed kind and grandfatherly, but then so had the man's face on our train to Lodz. I wasn't foolish enough to judge anyone based on appearance. My mind raced. In a small community such as this, these two surely knew each other. She would tell him her suspicions, and if he tried to grab us, I'd have only one choice: the gun. It was still unloaded, but they didn't know that. I'd use it to steal this man's wagon, and we'd get as far as we could with it before we found another place to hide. I had no idea what we'd do after that. "Dainsy Zorbery," the man greeted us in Polish, and stopped his wagon, but his friendly smile quickly evaporated. Perhaps he sensed the tension in the air, or perhaps he also suspected Esther and me. Why wasn't she looking up? Why didn't she defend her identity, her false identity? "These girls and I were talking," the woman said. "I think they are visitors to our little village," he said. "Welcome." We're on our way to visit our grandmother," digging in with the lie that I was my only option, short of waving my unloaded gun around. "Maria Nowak, do you know her?" He smiled. "As a matter of fact, I do. My name is Whit Galinsky. I can take you there." Esther and I looked at each other. Could we trust him? And what were we supposed to do when he dropped us off at this woman's house? Go to the door and have her shoo us away as strangers right in front of this man? "Look at that one," the woman said, pointing a crooked finger at Esther. "She's obviously cold." "How right you are," Whit said, finishing the woman's sentence again. "Your concern for the health of these two girls does you credit, ma'am. Thank you for your kindness, but I'll make sure they get to their grandmothers." I didn't think he was nearly as naive as the woman clearly believed, but I hadn't decided yet what that meant for us. "Thank you, sir. We'd appreciate the ride," I said, heading to the back of the wagon. When the opportunity came, we'd jump out and run. Even that would be impossible. Whit patted the seat beside him. Ride up here where we can pass the trip with some good conversation. I took Esther's hand. "She's my cousin." He smiled. "Your cousin can sit behind us. There's plenty of room." We didn't have any choice. I certainly wouldn't stay another minute in this woman's company. I disliked her enough by now that I didn't want her eggs any more. Well, yes, I did, but if I ate them, I wouldn't enjoy them nearly as much as I would have before. The bigger question was, would getting into this man's wagon save us from the woman or prove more dangerous than she ever could have been? Chapter 22. February 18th, 1943. Road near Kolocene. From what I'd seen, there were 3 kinds of Polish citizens in the country these days. The first were those who endeared themselves to the invaders, who proudly allowed their home to be assimilated into the German territory and their lives into the Nazi culture. They helped in the war efforts, either because it benefited them or because it kept them from harm. The woman with the eggs probably belonged in this category, but I was glad we weren't there long enough to find out for sure. These were the kind of men who had stopped Yitzhak and my father on the street and harassed them or even beat them, knowing they wouldn't fight back because the persecution would only get worse if they did. Or the woman who rode the trolley through the ghetto to laugh at the Jews and shout that we had finally gotten what we deserved. I considered them traitors to Poland, and certainly traitors to the fellow citizens who were being crushed beneath the boots of the Nazis. When this war ended, I suspected many of these people would meet their end just as the Nazis eventually would, with shame and cowardice, having been betrayed themselves, and I wouldn't shed a single tear when they did. The second group of Poles, the largest group, were merely surviving, trying to blend into the background. They might have moved into the homes abandoned by Jews who were sent to the ghettos, and might have taken over our shops and our possessions, but they felt little joy in it. They didn't help us, but they believed that at least ignoring our situation caused no harm. They were wrong. If there was any difference between causing a man to drown and failing to throw him a rope, it certainly didn't matter to the man in the water. Although a small minority, the third group of Poles was different. They helped. They snuck close to the ghetto at night and tossed bread over the walls. They looked the other way when a Jewish child stole food from their shop to take back to their family, or they took Jewish people into their lives, into their homes, and offered them a place to hide, a chance to escape the fate that tens of thousands of us had already suffered. They did this knowing what would happen to them and their families if they were caught. I would love these people for as long as I lived and fight for them as hard as I would fight for any of my own. And now I was sitting beside a man on a wagon, trying very hard to figure out which of these types of Poles he was. I couldn't make any assumptions, and I couldn't give away anything until I knew for sure. But this was always the most dangerous moment in a first contact. How could we get him his help unless I gave up some information about myself? Everything I told Whit so far was a lie. That my name was Helena and Esther was my cousin. He seemed to believe we were looking for our grandmother's house, though I'd not had to give him an address since he claimed to already know where she lived. And so far, he was speaking to me as if I was Polish, as if I was like him. I wanted to keep it that way. "Where are your families?" he asked. "Still in Lodz, but they felt we'd be safer here in the countryside." "Nowhere is safe," Whit sighed. "The partisans often move through this area, which brings the Germans in to search for them. It's only a matter of time before we feel the full effects of war out here." He looked over at me, kindly, perhaps with sympathy. "I suspect you two have already felt far too much of the war." "The war is everywhere," I replied. "Keep the lies simple, general. Give up nothing." "Why was the woman giving you trouble back on the road?" she asked. "She meant no harm. She just doesn't know us." "Ah, well, I know her. She's delivering those eggs to a German officer today." "He buys them?" "He buys the information she brings along with the eggs and pays her well. She tells him about any partisan activity here, about anything suspicious she might have seen. It's possible she will tell him about you and your cousin." Behind me, Esther drew a sharp breath. The possibility that we'd have German soldiers tracking us towards Warsaw was a terrible threat, one that twisted my gut into knots too, but I couldn't let it show, so I shrugged it off. She has nothing interesting to say about us." "We both know what she'll tell that officer. You have no grandmother anywhere near here." "I do. Her name is—" "What is your real name, child? It's not Helena, and I doubt that's your cousin." My hand slipped into the bag with the gun. I wrapped my fingers tight around the metal, though I wouldn't bring it out unless I had to. He seemed so nice. Had seemed so nice. Now I wasn't sure what to think, though I was fully willing to believe the worst if necessary. Before it came to that, I tried to quell his suspicions. "My name is Helena." No, it's not, and that's fine," Whit sighed. "It's all you can say." "I understand. I need to know, Helena. It took a long time for me to realize what was happening to the Jews, and there are still far too many of us who don't understand it, because it's not happening to us. Does that make sense?" I shook my head, and it wasn't because I missed his point. I knew far too well what he meant. The animal who wanders free has no idea what is happening to the one caught in the trap. But I wanted to keep this man talking as long as possible. Better him than me. Whit took a slow breath and then said, "There will come a time when everyone must account for their actions during this war. Some will be judged as evil, others as complacent, but I suspect the greatest number of us will fall to our knees and weep when we discover the full extent of the crimes being committed here." "Will that be you, sir?" I asked. "Do you mourn for those who have died here?" "I mourn for those I could not help." He eyed Esther, who had been facing sideways as much as possible. "You girls need a place to hide, I think."